In the last video, we talked about the assessment phase of the dental hygiene process of care in conducting a oral health promotion program. In this particular video, we're going to focus on the diagnosing phase of the dental hygiene process of care. Remember that the diagnosing phase is a natural conclusion to the assessment phase, and that's where we identify the priorities and develop goals and objectives for our particular program that we're developing. So when we're talking about priority, we have to look at all the needs within that community because, as I've mentioned several times before, each community is going to have a ton of different needs. So we need to be able to set priorities in order to deal with them systematically. We can't bite off more than we can chew with our oral health promotion programs. So we have to create some way to prioritize those needs within that community. So when you are prioritizing, we need to decide what community, what segment of the population are you going to serve, and what problem are you going to address, because you can't address all of the caries and all the periodontal problems and all the oral cancer problems within one oral health promotion program. So we need to make it a little bit more manageable, and that's done through prioritization. So one way that we can start thinking about creating priorities is really talking to our community leaders, as well as any kind of task group that has already been developed, maybe by the community itself or maybe by the professional organizations within that community. This not only helps you gain community support, but engaging community leaders and people that are already established within that community will aid with people accepting your program from the first point, and then it also makes your implementation a lot easier overall. So when we engage the community leaders and the people within power within that community, they may have some insider knowledge about the inner workings of that community. They may have some insider knowledge about political issues that might be brewing, or economic issues that might be just around the corner that may affect your oral health promotion plan. So they can also be very, very helpful in helping you navigate those kind of uncharted territory. So how do we determine priorities? There are a few different ways that we can determine priorities, but we have to determine those priorities because we have, as I've said multiple times before, very limited resources overall. So a couple of common ways to set those priorities. The first way is that when you are looking at a community, you may want to focus on problems that affect a large amount of those people within that community. And that may take priority than problems that affect just a small segment of that population. For example, if I'm comparing breast cancer versus Langerhans cell histocytosis, I know I told you all before that my brother has Langerhans cell histocytosis, which is a relatively rare condition that affects a small amount of people overall, and there's probably just a handful of people within different communities. So if we're going to focus our time and our efforts and all of our resources, we're probably going to focus on people that have breast cancer because it affects a larger amount of people within each community. So that's one way that we can determine priorities. Another way that we can determine priorities is that we can look at the seriousness of that problem. So if there's some issues that have very dire consequences and very serious in nature, those can take priority over less serious conditions. So for instance, if I was comparing the common cold to, which affects a large amount of people, if I compare that to Lyme disease, which affects not as many people, Lyme disease is way more serious than the common cold. And long-term effects of Lyme disease include arthritis, cardio problems, nervous system problems, neurological problems. So it can be very, very serious. And believe me, I live it every single day with my husband. So it is very serious. So I can compare those two conditions and say, well, a common cold, yeah, it affects probably a good number of people within the population of our community, but it has a natural life course and it will go away within a week or two. But we have this other issue that's within our community, Lyme disease, that has these serious consequences if left untreated. So I'm gonna really focus my time and my effort and all my resources on that segment of the population because it has long-term consequences. So those are the two different ways that we can determine priorities whenever we are creating our oral health promotion programs. So we also know, looking at our epidemiology, that dental disease is not discriminative, and so it affects a large amount of people. So we're going to have to whittle down our target groups. So some potential target groups are children, our elderly population, moms to be, our low income population. So it really kind of depends on the dental conditions and dental diseases that you find in your needs assessment. And then you can go and select your target population. So if the community decides to address the problem of dental caries first before they address other problems that they found in their needs assessment, we know through our epidemiological numbers that specific groups are more susceptible to dental caries. Kiddos, our low-income people, our racial and ethnic minorities are all more prone to have dental caries and untreated dental caries. So those are the target groups that we would want to really focus on as opposed to our elderly population or our medically compromised population. So just as a review, our goals versus objectives, these definitions are the very same as what they were in oral health education. A goal is not measurable. It's a very broad, abstract statement of what you want your program to accomplish at the very end. So, for example, we want to improve oral health. That is a very broad statement, and we can't necessarily measure that as it is. That's why we write objectives. So remember, objectives are specific, they're very measurable statements, and it describes what you want to happen as a result of your oral health promotion program. Remember that you have to write your objective correctly. If you write your objective correctly, then it's going to allow you to evaluate your program at the very end. If you do not write your objective correctly, then you're setting your evaluation methods up for failure. Now, while I say this, that goals and objectives and their definitions are the very same for oral health education and oral health promotion programs, they're not the objectives are not exactly the same for oral health promotion programs. So the objectives that we reviewed in oral health education are instructional objectives intended for an education project. And it had a certain formula, quote unquote formula, for you to write those objectives. If you have an oral health promotion program, you're going to write your objectives differently. And there's two different types of objectives that we write for oral health promotion programs. The objectives for oral health promotion programs have 5 different components. So, or this would be the the quote-unquote formula of how to write an objective for an oral health promotion program. We're going to identify the what, which is the condition or the situation that you want to obtain via your oral health promotion program. You want to identify the extent, which is how much of a change is going to occur as a result of your oral health promotion program. And then we're going to identify who is the target group that we're going to really focus on. We're going to identify where, what is the geographic location of the program, and when. We want to have an end time where we are going to start the evaluation phase and collect the data, and then hopefully we're going to see some results by that time. So the first type of objective for the oral health promotion program is an outcome objective. So basically an outcome objective states a reduction of the problem at the end of the program. So basically what it is what you want to achieve at the conclusion of your oral health promotion program. So for example, by 2020, no more than 10% of the population aged 6 to 17 years old in Toothtown will have lost any teeth as a result of caries. So if we deconstruct this particular sentence, we can identify those 5 components of this particular objective. The who is the 6 to 17-year-olds. Where is Toothtown? The when is by 2020. And I believe that the what and the extent is a little bit harder to identify in these types of objectives. So what are we really focusing on here? What is the condition to be obtained? That's the quote-unquote what. Tooth loss is what we're really focusing on here. And the extent, that is the situation to be obtained. We want no more than 10%. So basically, we want a very small segment of the population that is going to be having teeth extracted or lost because of carious reasons. When you have an objective written like this, you can start thinking about how you're going to assess it at the end of your program. And you can also make an assumption of what your baseline data told us. What was the baseline data? So in this particular instance, the assessment, how are we going to assess whether anybody lost any teeth as a result of caries? We're probably going to do a clinical screening. And we're going to do either a BSS or a DMFT. And then we're actually going to look at, if we do the DMFT or the DMFS, we're going to look at that missing component specifically. The baseline data, we can assume that baseline data told us that tooth loss as a result of caries was a major problem, and it was greater than 10%. We can't say it was like 25 or 30% just based on this objective, but we can definitely conclude that over 10% of the population in this age category had tooth loss as a result of carious lesions. So that's the outcome objective. The other type of objective is a process objective. The process objective actually states a solution to the problem. So we're actually going to talk about the oral health promotion activity in this objective. So for example, by 2020, 90% of the population in Toothtown will have access to fluoridated water supplies. So if we deconstruct this and identify those 5 components of the objective, we can see the when, that's 2020, where is Toothtown, who is the population, the what is the condition to be obtained. We want to increase fluoridated water supplies. And then the extent, which is the scope or the magnitude of the situation to be obtained, is at least 90% of the population. Again, we can start thinking about assessment methods in terms of evaluation. So how would we evaluate whether 90% of the population in Toothtown has access to fluoridated water by 2020? We would probably talk to the water company, because then they would know what they're doing in their water company in terms of how they're fluoridating and how much of the population actually utilizes their services. And you can make an assumption of what the baseline data also says here. And the baseline data probably told us that less than 90% of the population had access to fluoridated water. So our objective through our oral health promotion program is to actually increase the amount of people that have access to fluoridated water systems. So notice that, in summary, with these two objectives, notice that the process objective will talk about a program, a solution to the problem. In an outcome objective, all they talk about is a reduction of the problem. They won't talk about how they are going to go about solving it, what types of methods or programs that they're going to implement. So that's the two biggest differences between an outcome objective and a process objective. So in the next video, we're going to talk about the planning, the implementation, and the evaluation phases of the dental hygiene process of care.